about the Ohlone Way, and that was sort of a big splash book here. I can tell you it was definitely a big splash in Berkeley, and then clearly in environs and beyond. And how did that come to be?
God, you know, I first wrote a book called Earth Manual about working with kids on wild land, which I was doing with East Bay Regional Park District. Then there came that gorgeous year of hiking around and writing of this quirky little guide called the East Bay Out. And the East Bay Out I created Heyday Books and we published it, and that was the Books Under the Bed. And then I wanted to do, I just loved the writing, I loved the typesetting, I loved the design, I loved getting out into the world and selling them to people, I loved giving talks. I liked doing the whole thing, so I decided to do another book that way. And I thought I would write a book about Indian life in the Bay Area because there was a need for it, and because I thought I knew something. And I thought I could do it in a half a year. I thought and I had a schedule on the wall. I had a schedule. I was going to spend 3 months researching and 3 months writing. And I thought there wasn't very much to know about it. I thought that there was a kind of simple people that lived on the shores of the bay and ate acorn and hunted deer. And led a simple life, sort of like Paleolithic hippies or something, is the way I envisioned them. And then I got into it, and I got into it for all the wrong reasons. I got into it without knowing anything. I got into it without knowing. I didn't even know what I didn't know. And then I started learning things, and I started reading things, and I started getting more into the complexities of life, into the nuances, into the subtleties, into the way people related to one another. I then began to meet Indians through the research, and meet anthropologists and archaeologists and historians, and it was a door that opened up, and you know, I keep wondering what happens if I had decided to do another book, if I had decided to do a book on urban landscape or something like that. I mean, if it would have opened up some other, it was accidental that it opened up into Indians. But there comes a time in your life when you just want to be useful to the world, when you want to actually do something that's valuable, when you actually want not just to, I'd already written a couple of books. I'd seen it in print. I'd gotten good reviews. People told me I was wonderful. I suppose I could have kept along doing that, but I did something and I realized there was a need for it. And there was a need for it among Indians to have a voice in the world, to have a presence in the world. There was a need for people to know what their deep past was like. I felt useful.
So I was going to ask you a little bit about the archive at the Bancroft Library and how invaluable that was to writing the Ohlone Way. And we could talk about that a little bit. But this little door that opened, it's a big door now.
It was a little door that opened up into a spectacularly big world. And it's a world that has never failed to inspire and move me. In some ways, it's coming upon California's oldest and deepest sense of itself, its truest voice. It's coming upon people who have gone through annihilation, who have gone through tragedy, who have reinvented themselves. I've seen acts of grace and renewal that are just heartbreakingly beautiful. I've met people, you know, it's funny, I've met people who are so damn funny. I mean, so comic. I mean, Harry Fonseca, if he was a Maidu artist, I'd have lunch with Harry Fonseca, and it would be a 2-hour lunch. And if somebody recorded it, if there were film people recording it, you'd end up having 1 hour and 45 minutes of pure laughter and 15 minutes of conversation. I mean,
maybe we should do that.
I mean, he was just so damn funny. I remember. I can just remember things that were so funny, and people sharing stories that are so beautiful.
So do you have, what comes to mind about, I mean, what sort of gem comes to mind when you can reach back and think about one or two of these beautiful stories that you heard, that you learned about?
Well, God, I mean, there's so much that comes to mind that, You know, I wrote the Ohlone Way in '78. I could never write it again. That I thought I knew something back then that was, when your knowledge becomes deeper, when everything you say you know an exception to it, when the world fills up not just with abstractions but with individual people with their stories. I mean, where do I begin? Where do I begin? I mean, this last fall, every year for 30 years there's a roundhouse up in the Sierra that I go to for a ceremony. And every year I bring a table full of books that we've published, and I'll set that table up full of books, and I'll bring 3 or 4 fold-up chairs and sit down in those fold-up chairs, and we sit under a big oak tree, and you have from the roundhouse the sound of the floor drum and the people dancing, and you have, as I was sitting around those chairs, just people telling stories, old friends coming up. I've been around this world for over 30 years now, so people come up, I knew their grandparents, I knew their great-grandparents. I was in touch with a generation of people that were raised by Indians who remembered California before the gold rush. I mean, they were in direct contact with that old big way of thinking and stuff. And people sit around and they'll just tell stories, and the stories have no beginnings and they have no ends and they have no morals, and it's just gossip, and it's stories of spirit and stories of cultural renewal and stories of victory and stories of just defeat that you wouldn't believe that a human being could withstand defeat like this, and stories of such luminous victory. That I went off this fall with the Chumash have been rebuilding the plank canoes. And these beautiful plank canoes that they used to have, that they used to sail off from Santa Barbara area to the Channel Islands. And I went off with them, and they'd been rebuilding. The last canoe, the last traditional canoe, had been built in the early 1800s. And in 1830, there was a guy named Fernando Librado, an Indian who was brought into Mission Santa Buenaventura. And he became an anthropologist of his own people. He just began to ask questions of the old-timers. How did you do this? How did you do that? And how did you build the canoe? And he got the instructions for how you take the redwood and how you take the elkhorn antler wedge, and you just sheave out the planks, and how you trim the planks. And they didn't have metal, so they sewed the planks together. They drilled holes with obsidian, and they sewed the planks together. And how you ended up caulking it with asphaltum from the seeps in the Santa Barbara Channel, and how you ended up sanding it down with seal skin, and how you ended up putting inlaying the abalone, and the prayers that you had to say, and the secrets of the Society of the Tummel. It was called the Tummel, was this boat, and the society that you needed to paddle it, and the rituals that you needed to launch it. And the wonderful fact that it is made of redwood, and there's no redwood that grows in the Santa Barbara area. They'd never seen a redwood tree. It was all driftwood. And for them it was the gift of the sea. The sea had given them the wood so they could return to the sea. I mean, this thing of such beauty. And he recorded it in the 1830s. He got all this wonderful information, and he kept it in his head. And in the 1900s, there was an anthropologist, John P. Harrington, came, and he spilled it all out. And the anthropologist picked it up. And back in the, about 15 years ago, the Chumash, there was a remarkable woman, Roberta Caldero, who created the Chumash Maritime Society. And they went back into these old instructions, and they rebuilt the boats. And they've been going off to the island, and they've been renewing the rituals, they've been renewing the language. Just so damn beautiful.
Yeah.